experience.
Because of this claim that they say they saw Jesus resurrected. Like
they're all claiming that Rogan's anti-Semitic because he said that the Kanye song is catchy.
Something different that goes on there, that they're like, this is a miracle, right? Dead people don't usually rise from the dead.
So what is your personal...
No, there was already a pre-existing belief in Judaism about the resurrection of the dead, which would lead them to invent a story about that happening.
Belief when it comes to the resurrection. What do you think do you have a belief, or do you just try to interpret the text and try to see what is the message?
Well, I think so. As a historian, I do think it is a historical question. You have a guy who objectively lived.
No, you see, this is where they lie. You're not a historian, dude. You're a textual analyst or something like that. You speak some foreign languages. As a historian, he was a historical figure. You're a Christian apologist. You're not a historian. If anything that you learn in history doesn't jive with Jesus not existing, you won't cover it.
Who objectively lived. He objectively died. And then individuals close to his inner circle claimed that
there's no objectively lived. That's bullshit.
See him not dead.
Right.
Again.
This is highly unusual activity.
Highly unusual.
Right. So, but it's...
A couple Jews claim to see him in visions. The earliest account of Jesus appearing to anybody is... in Paul's letters. He says he appeared to James and Peter, Cephas, the 12, which is weird because I thought Peter was supposed to be in the 12. And at this point, there wasn't a 12. There was only 11 because Judas had died and left. And then the 500, he said, and then to Paul. And this is a post-resurrection appearance. Never places him being appeared by anybody on earth. Why does Kid Rock want to time travel to have gay sex with Jesus? Gay DJ sex on the... I know. That's a good question.
Hard when you're dealing with illiterate population.
A couple Jewish fanatics claimed that that Jesus appeared to them in visions and dreams and revelations, and seeing him in God's secret hidden messages from the scriptures. This is not objectively they all knew a Jesus.
Populations, you're dealing with thousands of years of time, you're dealing with an oral tradition, and then you have us sitting here talking about it in 2024, trying to figure it at the end of 2024, trying to figure this out, literally the end, last couple of days. It's very difficult for anybody who thinks of themselves as an intelligent person who's secular to even entertain the possibility that someone died and come back to life.
And I get that, but we've already talked about the fact that we don't think that the only thing that exists is matter and motion. We as in you and I, right? Like, we believe that there's something else going on in this world.
There must be something else. Hey, we all agree something else is happening. So why can't Jesus do all this magical Jewish fairy tale shit? Why? So we don't know all the answers to everything. So Jesus, the magical Jewish superhero Jesus raising from the dead and born a virgin, like, it could be possible. Come on. Come on. This is such weak apologetics. So pathetic.
But we've already talked about the fact that we don't think that the only thing that exists is matter and motion. We as in you and I, right? Like, we believe that there's something else going on in this world that's a little bit crazy.
There's something else.
And that to, I think, exclude that, I think excludes something that you're kind of putting blinders on for.
And don't believe in magical Jewish myths and you're putting blinders on. Anti-Semitic blinders. You don't believe in the Jewish fairy tales? Anti-Semitic blinders.
I mean, you're right in terms of all of these ancient conventions. The Gospels are written in the lifetime of the eyewitnesses, and they're written in this period of time where you have groups of individuals who could have...
The Gospels are not written by eyewitnesses. And arguing that it's in the lifetime of eyewitnesses is presupposing that there was a lifetime. The Gospels, most scholars believe, I believe they're written, the first Gospel mark is written after 70 AD. Jesus supposedly died in the early 30s. That's 40 years later. We're supposed to trust some ancient Jews who are telling a magical story written 40 years after the fact. And then when the earlier versions we have of Jesus, it's no biographical details, it's no miracles, it's no parables, it's no him walking around Jerusalem and hanging out with disciples.
Fact check those things. So
how do you fact check someone coming back from the dead?
Well,
nobody fact checked Jesus coming back from the dead. Everything that this guy says is garbage.
Saw his body, right?
Paul says that 400 people saw him all at once.
400 people saw the crucifixion?
No, saw the resurrected Jesus. Yeah, 1 Corinthians 15. Paul says
it's 500. I've covered this video before. It's 500 people. And Richard Carrier talks about how Pentecostus is very similar to Pentecost. There's only 2-letter difference between the two words, and he thinks that got scrambled up. The appearance to the 500 is not in any of the Gospels. It's only in Paul's letter, which was written first, and none of them repeated that very important detail because it didn't happen. And his proof that, they could fact check is that Paul claims 500 people saw it. So one person claims 500 people saw it, but none of those 500 people ever wrote anything down. or talk to anybody who wrote anything down. Everything about this guy is just pure slop apologist. And all of the mainstream alternative media gatekeeper shills are all promoting him for softball interviews, shoveling the Jesus into the culture. And you guys don't see anything suspicious about it, huh?
That Jesus appeared to the disciples, and then he appeared to 400 people all at once. I mean, if we read the Gospel of Luke and the Gospel of, or the Gospel of Luke and Acts, so same author wrote these both documents, he says that Jesus was walking around teaching them for 40 days after he was resurrected from the dead. And so these are written within a time period when you have people who would have seen Jesus' ministry, who were there, say, at something like the feeding of the 5,000, who could have been able to verify or debunk some of these things that are being said.
Nobody did that. Nobody can verify stuff that would have happened decades before, especially after the temple was destroyed and Israel was crushed. Jerusalem was crushed. They start saying, hey, this stuff happened 40 years ago, 50 years ago. And he's saying they could go back and fact check it. There was nobody fact checking those things. Did they have the internet? Did they have newspapers? How are they going to fact check?
A bunch of scared guys who, because Jesus wasn't the only messianic figure who arose and claimed to be the Messiah.
Right.
There were a number of individuals both prior to and after Jesus, but they die and the movement dies with them.
Do you think...
Layla says he sounds even more gay when sped up. He does come off as kind of gay. My understanding, he has a family and kids, and he's Canadian. Keep that in mind. It's the Canadian accent that comes off as gay.
Think it's possible that he didn't die? And do you think it's
and the schmedium little shirts he wears.
possible that they thought he was dead? Because that does happen.
See, I wear double
There was actually a
XL.
case very recently where a guy was
And
about
even those are tight.
for organs. They thought he was dead, and this guy started moving again and came back to life. It's a very, very bizarre case because his family had been told that he was going to be harvested for organs. They were preparing for that.
God.
And this guy
Okay.
comes back.
Yeah,
All
we know
right.
a lot about Roman crucifixion. And we know that, and we know that they did their job well.
Yeah.
And so, in fact, if you look at, say, very skeptical biblical scholars, like non-believing, atheist, agnostic Christian scholars, they will say if we can know anything about Jesus, like they'll cast it out on a lot of the things that we read about in the Gospels in terms of the actual historical Jesus of Nazareth. They'll say one thing we can be sure of is that he died by crucifixion under Pontius Pilate.
Yeah, secular scholars like Bart Ehrman says, oh, we know for sure he definitely did that. No, we don't. No, we don't. Secular scholars, atheist scholars are really just neoconservative Christian apologists. Bart Ehrman received all of his education at Christian apologist evangelical Zionist universities.
Because we have not just multiple attested documents that we refer to as the New Testament, but Roman and Greek and Jewish writers.
They're not multiple attested documents. Have you not heard of the synoptic problem, buddy? Matthew copied Mark, Luke copied Matthew and Mark. And John came later, probably knew them all, but disregarded lots of it.
Writers refer to.
What? Who's attesting to Jesus? Paul, the author of more books of the New Testament than anybody? He never knew an earthly Jesus. Oh, it's attested by everybody. You mean like Paul, the earliest documentation we have of Jesus, and he never knew a Jesus? It really bothers me that Joe Rogan and all these big platforms bring him on, and they don't know the information to push back on this. They're just allowing all of the Christian apologist disinformation to run amok and don't platform anybody to expose it.
To that claim afterwards and talk about the fact that you have this guy, and it's mocked within earliest Christianity. So one of our earliest, in fact, not one of, the earliest depiction of Jesus on the cross is called the Alexamenos Graphido, and it's probably from the end of the 1st century, and it's it depicts
So after the Gospels?
an individual with their arms raised in an act of worship, worshiping a man with a donkey's head who's being crucified. Whoa. And right beside it, it says Alexamenos worships his God in Greek. Whoa. And it's mocking, right? Because crucifixion was for the lowest of the low. It was for like slaves. In fact, if you were a Roman citizen, you were banned from being crucified.
Who was it that got crucified upside down?
Peter.
Another story. Another later tradition story.
Why, was it because like regular crucifixion wasn't good enough for him? Or was it he didn't deserve it because Christ had gone through it?
Well, so the story is that they say we're going to crucify you, and he says it's like too big of an honor to die like my Lord, and they say, well, we can fix that.
Oh, Jesus. Shut your mouth, buddy.
Listen, the Romans were pretty brutal.
Oh, yeah.
But this is why we know, like, it's interesting. We know a lot about crucifixion, but crucifixion was seen as so disgusting. I believe it was Cicero who said that, like, the word crucifixion shouldn't even be on a Roman man's lips. So, like, that's where we get that word, is because this was designed to humiliate, and it was designed to be as painful as possible. There was actually a really good article done by JAMA, the Journal of the American Medical Association, which was done by a number of, I think it was in the 70s or the early 80s. It was done by a group of biblical scholars and then medical professionals. And so they looked at the conventions of what we do know about Roman crucifixion, and then they looked at the descriptions of the gospel to try to figure out, okay, if we could diagnose how Jesus died, how would he have died? And so they basically came up with this idea that he probably asphyxiated to death. You kind of drown in your own blood. But the chances of Jesus surviving the crucifixion, I think, are narrow to none. And the chance of...
Oh, my God. Nobody thinks he survived the crucifixion. Why are you talking about this stupid shit? We're saying it's a myth and it didn't happen, not that he survived it.
Appearing 3 days later, completely fine. I mean, you don't. If the first thing you do, if you survive
3 days, what do you know? Just according to all the prophecies. 3 days in the whale, 3 days in Hosea, 3 days can be interpreted from Daniel as well. Come on. This is such a joke. Giving this guy free reign to spout all this Christian shit. Hey, all the biggest influencers and Joe Rogan, #1 podcast in the world, is spoon-feeding you Christian apologetics and never exposes Jesus. Internet crusader Christians, do you not see the problem with that? If I was a psyop, if exposing Jesus as fake and Jewish was a psyop, then how come Joe Rogan doesn't have me on? He has on all of the Christians though. Okay, all right.
Crucifixion, and then you go and you find your disciples. The first thing you say is not, peace be with you. It's get me to a hospital, right?
Did they have them back then?
No.
Are we entirely certain of their measurement of days?
So this is an interesting question because of the differences between when the Gospel of John says Jesus died compared to the Synoptics. Because John appears to be using the Roman convention of counting time, and the other Gospels, when they describe the timing, appear to be using the Jewish ones. And actually, if you correlate between the two, they match up pretty well. So the thing is,
look, so he just said the Synoptic Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, contradict John. John has Jesus being, he is the Passover lamb on the Passover day, and the other days have it the night before. And he's like, oh, he's got some cope. Oh, he's doing different calendars, and this is explainable. It's like, no, bitch, stop the pilpul.
Any part of a day was considered a day. So 3 days and 3 nights becomes almost an idiom for any part of that day is the day. So if Jesus, and because they count evening and morning, evening to morning is the day, it's very possible that it wasn't like how we would think of 3 24-hour days, especially if he dies on Friday and wakes up on Sunday.
So that would actually make it less time than more time.
Yeah.
So it's not like he had recovery time.
Oh, no, he didn't have recovery
time. That's what I'm saying. It's not like it was 3 days, it was actually 3 months.
Oh, no.
Yeah, so then 400 people saw him afterwards.
That's the claim that Paul makes.
Yeah. And how many different people have some sort of a recollection or a writing or something that's attributed to them of being witness to his resurrection?
We have Peter, Paul, Jude, James, and Matthew, Mark, and Luke. The thing with Matthew, Mark, and Luke is that Matthew and John are attributed to direct disciples of Jesus. Luke and Mark are not. So they are not eyewitnesses within the Jesus community.
None of them are eyewitnesses.
He's right up front about it.
And all the rest of the Bibles, the ones he just named, Jude, James, Peter, Paul, they don't talk about an earthly Jesus. It's celestial, heavenly, redeemer Jesus.
He's like, hey, I'm not an eyewitness. Don't confuse me with an eyewitness. But he actually uses conventional writing. What's the term I'm looking for? He uses writing conventions of the day that would fit within regular biography that was written within the Roman world. So you have a guy named Quintilian who is basically, I mentioned before, with the he's teaching people how to write, and he says that if you're going to write biography, you need to be interviewing eyewitnesses, and you can't be too far away from the event to be able to write these things. And Quintilian, Lucian, and Josephus.
So Jesus is not biography then? Thanks for proving our point.
Who are all these very prominent ancient biographers and writers of history, have a lot of crossover in the way they describe how you should write history with the words that Luke uses at the beginning of his gospel, where he says, I'm interviewing eyewitnesses and I'm writing up an orderly account. And so he's saying, I'm going to...
Luke did not interview witnesses. He copied Matthew and Mark, who were also symbolic fiction based on prophecy and not written by eyewitnesses. Dude, this guy gets so much shit totally wrong. And millions of Joe Rogan followers and all the mainstream alternative media podcast followers think he's the authority and this is all true and he's done his homework.
Use these methods that are expected as good history of my day. I'm not an eyewitness, so I'm going to try to find the people who are eyewitnesses, and I'm going to try to encapsulate this within...
The Gospels are unscholarly, written by unknown authors, unknown time, unknown place, unscholarly, uncritical, don't cite any sources, don't show any skepticism. They're the worst form of proof. It's full of magic and prophecy fulfilling stories. And this guy's going to sit up here and gaslight and be like, oh, it's the greatest documentation ever.
Document that communicates what is being written.
So we have an account of the resurrection. Do we have an account of the denial of the resurrection? Is there an historical record of him just dying and this, like a refutal or a rebuttal rather to what they're saying?
No, the only ones from the ancient world that deny his resurrection are groups that come on afterwards that sometimes are described as Gnostics, and they're not necessarily just denying it for the reasons we might think they were. They're denying it because they haven't...
You really believe that nobody was denying that Jesus really resurrected from the dead? Just because we don't have records of it, because probably the Christians either didn't preserve those records or destroyed them. We know they destroyed their works of critics. They'll burn the books of skeptics and critics, and then they'll also burn the critics.
incorporated ideas of pagan philosophy, where they believe that the spiritual is good and the physical is bad. So if Jesus was crucified, so let me back up. If Jesus is God, he cannot have a physical body. So they deny that he actually had a physicality to him. This is sometimes called Docetism, because dokein in Greek means to seem. So these groups that we describe as the docetics, they are denying that Jesus had a physical body. He only seemed to have a physical body. And they wrote documents later on. So the Gospel of Peter, which comes around in 2nd, 3rd, 4th centuries, is being written, and it has Jesus kind of chilling on the cross, because he's not really physical, because he's divine, and physical entities don't have physical bodies. So we don't actually get like a concrete denial of his resurrection in that way until you get things like the Gospel of Barnabas in the Middle Ages, which is it's actually the document that Billy brought up to me in the conversation we had, is the evidence that Jesus was never crucified, the Gospel of Barnabas. Well, Gospel of Barnabas is 15th century. It paraphrases Dante's Inferno. It's not an ancient document. So, but in the ancient world, nobody really had that big of a problem with these kind of supernatural claims. The more of the kind of skepticism was why you would worship a crucified individual to begin with.
Wow. So they were less surprised that he was resurrected.
Again, that's too. I mean, generally it's true. Back then, people did believe in wandering preachers and magicians, and think of all the pseudoscience bullshit people believe in today. They believed it. Just imagine 2,000 years ago. They're way more superstitious and susceptible to falling for charlatans that claimed magical stuff and magical stories. But to claim that nobody was suspicious that the Jews just made up a story about a resurrected Messiah. Of course they were. Of course they were.
Resurrected.
Or you would worship a crucified like teacher, was just seen as silly.
Because it's so humiliating to be crucified.
Yeah. And that like a God would let himself go through this.
No, martyrdom is admired. The phenomena of like supporting martyrs, again, every little thing he says is just so objectively wrong.
Right. Like
he died for us. It's like the greatest con ever. More people believing in this than ever. And he's like, oh, they would never. Doesn't make any sense.
What are you talking about? In fact, the ancient world didn't really have a problem with supernatural events. There is an ancient writer who mocks Christianity, and he particularly mocks Christianity in saying that, of course, Jesus did miracles, because Jesus had a childhood in Egypt. And he goes, all those Egyptians are magicians anyways, so he just learned the magic when he was a child. So he actually
they believed in magic.
Two things, that the narrative in the Gospels where it says that the Holy Family fled to Egypt during the reign of Herod, he corroborates that he actually thinks that happened, and that Jesus did miracles. He just attributes the miracles to Jesus being a traveling magician anyways. And
dude, come on. He doesn't corroborate that Jesus was in Egypt. He knows the gospel story that says, out of Egypt I call my son. And in the nativity story, they made up the whole slaughter of the innocents, Herod calling for the death of all the firstborn sons, which is just a retelling of Pharaoh and Moses. And nobody else wrote about the slaughter of innocents everywhere. Dude, this guy is so annoying how everything he says is so wrong. Oh, this confirms that Jesus was in Egypt. Out of Egypt I call my son is a prophecy.
It's quite interesting that a key aspect of scientific training is learning all the ways humans bias and mislead themselves with invalid thinking. Christianity is a demonstration. We're not heeding such lessons, leads.
Yeah, people that fall for Christianity have like a flaw in their mind of critical thinking and true skepticism. And so already Christianity is filtering people that don't have the best critical thinking. And then you get videos like this where everything the guy says is off base.
That is what's really fascinating, that the mindset of the people that lived back then was that whatever was going on in Egypt was so crazy that they had to be magicians.
Yeah, but everybody believed in supernatural events. Like there's no such thing as like a secular work in the ancient world. Even Plutarch, who's one of the most famous biographers in the ancient world, he wrote 90 biographies, of which 60 still survive today. He was a priest of Apollo. So like he's already assuming that the gods exist, that crazy things are going to happen in the world. And so they didn't have a problem with people doing miracles or crazy things happening. Well,
that's also why it's so interesting trying to...
Yeah, and Jesus is just as fake as all the other miracles that they believed in.
Your mind into the context of people that lived back then when you try to interpret what these stories were all about, because they did believe in things that weren't real. So when
Labrat sent $10. Alex O'Connor debunked Wesley so hard, then Wesley makes a video debunking himself. Such a joke. But Rogan is the biggest weasel. He said we need Jesus so many times. Keep doing what you're doing, Adam. We need your sarcasm.
Thank you. Yeah, and think about how Rogan has on all the intellectual dark webs and the Ben Shapiro's and Barry Weiss's and how much he loves Jordan Peterson, who's also shilling Jesus. Do you guys not get it yet? All of your sus influencers are promoting Jesus, and they never expose that Jesus is fake. And who would have faked him and why? They never go there.
they talk about this thing that we're supposed to believe is real.
Yeah, Alex O'Connor did do a good debunk. I think he even used Neil, Gnostic Informant's video in his debunk on Wesley Huff. Wesley Huff got stuff totally wrong. He tried to debunk Gnostic Informant and made a fool of himself and had to take down the video and apologize. And he was highly criticized and exposed because he got so much stuff wrong in this Joe Rogan interview.
when you have all this evidence that they believe things that aren't true.
Yeah.
It's interesting, right? Because like you're now saying, yeah, but this one really was true.
Right.
Well, there's so many different things that they thought of and believed that weren't true.
Yeah.